Dr. Joel. So I'm from the Department of Computer Science of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. So artificial intelligence is the ability of machines to mimic human cognitive functions such as learning, planning, reasoning, and even action. In recent years, AI has made giant strides far larger than initially imagined, even by its optimistic practitioners. So every day we hear about new exciting applications of AI, from face recognition systems to chatbots, drones, and self-driving cars. But as AI technologies become increasingly common, more and more people are becoming aware of the ethical issues that surround the applications of AI. So, for example, when a researcher develops an AI technology in the laboratory, he or she um, may have designed it for the benefit of mankind. However, there may be some technologies that can be used by people to do harm, those people with evil intent. Another ethical dilemma arises from the unintended consequences of AI. So we know that AI is not the same as human intelligence and may not necessarily share our values. So there's that possibility of it acting against us, and this cannot be ruled out at all. So these are just some of the issues that we need to grapple with. Our speaker for today is a catedrático or full professor at the School of Economics of the University of Navarre in Spain. He has had visiting and adjunct professorships at the Catholic University of America and Georgetown University. He is also currently a senior research fellow at the Center for Business and Society of ESE, the ESE Business School. He was the president of the European Business Ethics Network and was elected to the board of the Society for Business Ethics. Next year, he will be the president of this society. He also sits at the editorial board of Business Ethics Quarterly Journal and is the section editor of the Journal of Business Ethics. So everyone, please welcome Professor Alejo Sisan.
Okay, so thank you very much. Good morning from Spain and good evening in Manila. I oftentimes have to explain to my students here in Spain, it's 1 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. We say morning because until you've eaten lunch, which hereabouts is 2:30, it's still morning. So it's the lunchtime that determines whether you say good morning or good evening. In any case, as you've noticed, this paper, A Neo-Aristotelian Perspective of the Need for AMAs, or Autonomous Moral Agents, is a co-authored work. I myself have been trained as a philosopher, but since most of my research and teaching revolves around business ethics, a couple of years ago, I changed camps to the School of Business and Economics. My co-author, Dulce Redin, she's trained as an economist. So you might say, what are these two people who don't have any technological background? We do not claim to be computer scientists, data scientists, much less engineers. So why is it that we're sort of fish out of water speaking about autonomous moral agents? Well, I think the main motivation behind this is the fact that some time ago in 2013, people started talking about the Internet of Things. So this is a group of technologies that's powered by artificial intelligence, that's supposed to change the way we work, the way we produce different goods and services, hence the link with economics, the way we relate or communicate amongst ourselves, even the way we live. Okay, so the first thing in the morning, AI determines what appears on your newsfeed and probably on your way to work. You make use of some applications that tells you what the fastest route is. So AI is all over. Hence, our attempt to sort of understand these transformative changes that cut across different barriers, and in our little way, try to contribute to the integration between the physical, the biological, and the digital worlds. Not too long ago, in the New York Times, they came up with this article entitled, "Can a Machine Learn Morality?" I know it's not exactly the same question as the one we're posing, can machines be autonomous moral agents? But they're very closely linked because ethics, morality is something that you cannot outsource, fortunately or unfortunately. So learning ethics, learning morality cannot be entirely separated from being a moral agent. In the interest of time, I have divided this afternoon's presentation into 3 parts. First, a very brief introduction. We go through the definition of terms. Next, the main reasons for and against.
Dr. Season,
Yes.
can you share your slide?
I think I was doing that from the very beginning. Let me see.
Okay, we don't see the slide yet.
You don't see the slide. Let me see.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not me. Although while I thought that I was sharing slides with you, it's me. I don't know what's happening here, but anyway. Are you seeing me? Hello?
We can see you, but we don't see the slides.
You don't see the slides.
Yeah.
Perhaps, am I the host?
You're the co-host, so you can share the slide. You were able to share, or can you share it again? Because I shared a while ago, so somehow I interrupted your slides, so you have to reshare your slide.
Yeah, okay. As I said, I'm not a tech person, so let me see.
Share screen.
Yeah, but I'm looking for that. I've got 2 screens. I'm here right now, so let me check this. Okay, I should be sharing my screen. No, I lost it. Wait a minute.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. Okay.
So sorry about that. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, very briefly an introduction. Next, main reasons for and against autonomous moral agents, where the neo-Aristotelian perspective contributes to the conversation. Luckily, we published this article in open source, so you could access it quite easily. And the last part would be where we think the dialogue, the conversation should be heading. So we think the focus ought to be on human-computer interaction, more particularly a field called human-centered AI and hybrid decision-making. So without further ado, an autonomous moral agent is a system that features 3 main characteristics. First, it's interactive, meaning it takes in inputs, data, information from the external environment and processes that through an algorithm without any direct human intervention in real time, producing different outputs or a reaction in accordance with the data it has received. So it's interactive, autonomous, and adaptive, with considerations beyond security and safety. So it's supposed to have an idea of moral worth or moral value. Next, according to Moore, there are 4 levels of moral bots. It's not that I entirely agree with him, but I think this is useful to sort of set the baseline for our conversation today. On the very first level, he speaks of ethical impact agents. These are ethical insofar as they could produce physical harm or benefit. Think of an electric kettle or Roomba. this cleaning robot. Obviously, it produces some benefits, but you could also trip over a Roomba, hence producing some harm, some physical harm. Next are level 2 moral bots, the so-called implicit ethical agents. These have been programmed. The script is such that they always behave ethically. Whenever you approach an ATM machine will never cheat nor fool you. It will always follow the instructions. So in that sense, you might say an ATM machine is always honest. Third is an explicit ethical agent. What it adds to the previous level is a capacity to sort of think through or imagine different strategies and choose one which optimizes the desired result. So we're familiar with systems that play chess, systems that play Go. They're even able to beat human players. So that would be some sort of an explicit ethical agent. And then lastly, we have full ethical agents, which are characterized by consciousness, intentionality, and free will. This would be human level. I know that these aren't equivalent terms, but more or less, they're very closely related. Human level AI, artificial general intelligence, or even an artificial super intelligence. You notice there's a question mark at the very end because there's a lot of controversy whether we have already reached or will reach in our lifetimes in the very close future this sort of levels. Okay. So reasons for and against autonomous moral agents. Formosa and Ryan, they summarize a number of reasons in favor of AMAs, basically because they think that such technologies are already with us and they provide some intuitive support. So these systems are present, we're using them, so might as well make the most of these systems. They're thinking of autonomous vehicles, of autonomous weapon systems and robots used in healthcare for the sick, for the elderly, or minding children. So what they say is it's inevitable. We already have these robots. So sometimes they have to operate without there being any humans in the loop. In order to prevent harm, we have to make them ethical agents. Imagine, for instance, an autonomous vehicle. Okay, so you have to program the autonomous vehicle. Whose interest should it prioritize? Whether it should prioritize the interests of the passengers, of the driver, or the interests, the safety of the passers-by. Okay, so that is a design decision, which begs the question, of course, who would buy a car that prioritizes the safety of the passers-by rather than the driver or the passengers? Okay, and then there's also this issue of complexity. Think of healthcare bots who dispense medicines to the elderly, to the infirm. There are conflicts of interest because on the one hand, the patient needs to receive their medicine, but on the other hand, how about patient autonomy? Because every one of us is entitled to refuse certain forms of treatment which we think are useless or for one reason or another does not take our dignity sufficiently into account. So we have to train autonomous agents for these moral considerations. Then there are practical benefits. Some people think that robots are a lot better than us because they don't grow tired, they don't grow sleepy, they're never in a bad mood, they're unaffected by emotions and feelings that somehow cloud our judgment as human beings. So they're much better than us. Hence, let us go along and program them appropriately. However, I think that there are lots of technologies, think of landmines or nuclear weapons that are with us. We have them, we know how to make them. That doesn't mean we have an obligation to use them, heaven forbid. So oftentimes the ethical obligation is firstly not to produce more, and secondly, perhaps destroy even those that we already have. There's another piece of interesting research by Van Winsberg and Robbins, who are against AIs. They noticed that the reasons for autonomous moral agents are based on pragmatism. Yeah, we already have them, so might as well make the best use, or make the most. They say we could be recklessly forging ahead, which in itself isn't an ethical position. You have to consider weigh carefully the pros and cons of alternative actions rather than just simply sort of diving headfirst, right? So what they argue is that probably instead of transforming robots into autonomous moral agents, it's sufficient that they be safe, reliable, and trustworthy. Okay, who needs Roomba making ethical decisions anyways, right? And they come up with some other reasons, such as we cannot build autonomous moral agents because we cannot transform ethical knowledge into codified computational language. There could be some existential concerns that they could even threaten the human species. You know? Morality forbids it because we're creating a moral agent, and moral agents have dignity or intrinsic worth. So what is the sense in creating a moral agent that would always have to function as our slaves, do our own bidding, you know, if they have intrinsic worth that goes beyond slavery? Yeah. And it could also occasion moral de-skilling when we outsource decision making. And there are problems too about, okay, so we're going to build moral agents, but what sort of ethics will we teach it? There's some domain-specific concerns. What if the patients form unhealthy attachments with their robot caregivers? What happens when you fall in love, for instance, with a companion bot? And the responsibility concern, who will be responsible? Will it be the designer, the deployer, the company that sells these artifacts, or will it be the user? So what we could see here is that there's certainly argumentative breadth. They cut across different areas, are very imaginative, but hardly any depth in their reasoning. This is where we come in. This is exactly the part where we enter into the conversation, offering neo-Aristotelian anthropology and worldviews. Okay, so what we contribute is an understanding of human beings, an understanding of our psychological world, and how we are embedded in this wider universe. Okay, so it links together, as I said earlier, the physical world with the biological world and the digital world. That way we provide certain rootedness or depth, certain coherence, and convincingness to the arguments, in the same way that we're sensitive to nuance and differences in context. I recall discussing this paper earlier with a colleague from Carnegie Mellon, and he was telling me that the problem with his department is that they think we humans are computers. Okay, and we human beings are computers. So different wetware, but computers nonetheless. So I think neo-Aristotelian thinking has a lot to contribute to this conversation, basically by making three very fundamental distinctions. First, distinguishing what is natural from what is artificial. How did something come to me? If it's a result of human agency, it's not natural, but rather artificial. We humans, when we create something, oftentimes we're simply imitating nature. Next, the difference between living and non-living systems. I know it's not physically or scientifically verifiable, but there's such a thing called the soul, the intrinsic or the internal principle of self-movement. Unicellular organisms do not need to be plugged to an energy source. They don't need to be programmed. As long as they're in the proper environment, they have this internal source that allows them to seek what is beneficial to them and to flee from whatever does them harm. They assimilate what is beneficial as food, as nutrition, as nourishment. And that way, higher order organisms are able to grow, to differentiate themselves into different tissues, organs, organisms even. So we're moving through the difference between plants, animals, and humans here. So all human beings, all living systems experience nutrition, growth, and reproduction. The difference between animals and plants is that in order to carry out these biological functions, they have to move around in space. And for that, we need our senses, the external and the internal senses. We need sight, sense of smell, touch, and taste, because otherwise we're unable to navigate physical space. And if we're unable to navigate physical space, we'll be unable to find food or mates in order to reproduce. Humans have all of these basic biological functions, to which they add the capacity to carry out voluntary actions. Voluntary actions are those which arise from within, an internal principle, and they go on with a certain knowledge of the end or purpose. We know exactly what we're doing. We're self-directed and self-oriented. Now, amongst voluntary actions, we could distinguish between praxis, which is autotelic. I mean, that's a fancy Greek word, right? For saying that the end or the purpose is within the subject itself. Think of learning. Okay, so when we learn something, we're able to write books, we're able to do some research, we're able to teach in classes. But the main product of learning remains within us, knowledge. I mean, our knowledge is far more than the books that we're able to write or the classes that we're able to teach. So this is autotelic, the end is within us, as opposed to poiesis or heterotelic, the end is outside of us, outside of the maker, of the agent. Say, I don't know, a robot prints artificial meat. The artificial hamburger patty is clearly outside of the robot itself. Okay, so from an Aristotelian perspective, a neo-Aristotelian perspective, we're saying that there's no such thing as an autonomous moral agent, nor could there be one. It's never autonomous because it's dependent on algorithms. Next, it's not a moral agent because its excellence is technical. Its excellence lies on the products, not on the agent themselves. And thirdly, it's not even an agent because the principle, this energy source, is not internal but from the outside. It's merely a tool. Okay, so where should the focus be? Instead of insisting that robots and AI be ethical agents, perhaps we should be considering the field of human-computer interaction. And within this realm, I particularly like the orientation of human-centered AI by Ben Schneiderman and its usefulness for hybrid decision-making. So the ethical dimension lies not within the computers themselves. These are objects. These aren't ethical subjects. Rather, the only ethical subject is the human being insofar as they design, deploy, and use AI systems, making use, of course, of data sets. There are ethical issues regarding how data is gathered, how the algorithms are designed, because algorithms are opinions which are encoded, and the outputs, of course, the results of AI systems. This whole issue of automating versus augmenting goals, automation or augmentation goals. When we automate, we're basically substituting human beings with AI systems or robots. So we're treating humans and machines as if they were equals. And from an economic perspective, what that produces is a zero-sum game. We get rid of human workers, we substitute them with robots. And the business owners, they reap all the benefits from greater productivity, and the low-skilled workers, of course, they lose their jobs, and government loses revenue from payrolls. Sometimes I think this is fine, especially we're dealing with jobs that are dangerous, very dangerous. I would very much prefer robots that sort of in detonation teams, I'm sorry, diffusing bombs, better for robots to do that than any human being. Or when jobs are too dangerous, when they're dirty, like unclogging sewers, for instance, or it's just too dull. It's just too dull. I'm fascinated by the fact that they're actually human beings who make photocopies as a job. I remember when I was, whenever I'm doing research, sometimes you have to make photocopies, and I do this when I'm falling from my desk because I'm just so sleepy, because I don't see any thrill in making photocopies, right? So for those jobs, perhaps automation is okay, but the real benefit, I think, lies in augmentation. In computers, AI doing what it does best, and human beings more on the creative part, because that way there's complementariness rather than substitution, and we actually grow the economic pie. Yeah, we actually grow the economic pie. Now, human-centered AI. So oftentimes we think that when human control increases, machine control decreases. Now, Ben Schneiderman, his whole idea is this need not be the case. Yeah, humans do not have to cede control, to give up control when machines become smarter. That's in the case. I mean, there's some very egregious mistakes, such as in the case of the Boeing 737 MAX, when the automatic pilot system would not accept overrides from the human pilots themselves, and this ended up in crashes. Okay, so that's full machine control without hardly any human control, no human override. Let's compare that with the case of digital cameras or smart pacemakers or smart morphine pumps. Okay, I love taking pictures, but I don't have the patience to learn photography. So I get hold of one of these. Well, any phone has a fairly sophisticated camera, so you just point and shoot, and the digital camera itself ensures the filters, and later on there's always Photoshop, right? So a very high level of machine control and very high level of human control as well. So this is where the ethical import of computers lie, insofar as we interact with them. Now, regarding the question of which ethics to follow, there are basically two options. One is action-centered and the other is agent-centered. Action-centered is what do we humans get in exchange for our efforts? Whereas the agent-centered ethics is who do we human beings become as a result of our actions? Within ethics, there are three main ethical schools. The first two, deontology and consequentialism, would be action-centered. Deontology makes use of rules. So algorithms are basically rules, right? So, and then we also have the Asimov rules. Robots are never supposed to harm human beings, for instance. Consequentialism, that would be the ethical school behind, say, Waze. Okay, what is it that you'd like to optimize? and the computer should figure out how best to do it. For instance, when you're leaving your house in the morning, you'd like to go to work, you might say, okay, I'd opt for the fastest route, which is not necessarily the cheapest route, because sometimes there are those toll roads, right? So it's not the cheapest route. So it's analysis of costs and benefits depending on your parameters. What I personally advocate is the virtue ethics approach. The virtue ethics approach, I think, it brings together, it integrates the benefits of the two previous ones, because virtue ethics makes use of rules. These are necessary in setting the baseline, the floor of ethical deliberations. It also takes into account the costs and benefits of our choices. That's very necessary, especially in the business world and economics. Human desires are insatiable, whereas resources are very limited, if not materially, in terms of time. Yeah. And thirdly, because virtue ethics is, I think, the virtues are the elements that break the dilemmas. These are the elements that break the dilemmas. And in the slide, you'd see, okay, everyone would like to safeguard their privacy. Whenever you're using social media, you'd like to sort of safeguard your privacy. There's certain biometric data, biometric information, stuff that could identify you because they cannot be possessed by anyone else. I know the patterns in your iris, the patterns in your thumbprints, for instance, your particular genetic makeup. Yeah, so we require privacy. But at the same time, we'd like to have transparency in how decisions are made. If you're applying for a loan, you'd like to know exactly how or why you've been denied a loan, or why your loan application has been accepted. Yeah. So everyone realizes that transparency and privacy are contradictory values. So what breaks this dilemma? What breaks this dilemma is the virtue of trustworthiness. Okay, because otherwise there's no way to proceed. Next, the values would be bias, meaning unfair discrimination, and choice, the capacity to act upon our preferences. So again, we see that these are two contradictory values. You can't have them both. You can't sort of have your own preferences and at the same time not discriminate against others. To choose is to discriminate necessarily, right? So what is the virtue that breaks this dilemma? The virtue of social justice. There's certain things that we owe other people. And this has to be turned in amongst ourselves through joint deliberation. The dilemma between inclusion and exclusion, that's broken up by the virtue of friendship and civic participation, and work as well. Will AI create jobs? Will AI destroy jobs? What kind of jobs? What does AI do for inequality, and so forth and so on? So, I mean, in summary, I don't think there's any such thing as an autonomous moral agent, nor do we gain much by dedicating time and effort to creating them. Honestly, I think these are vanity projects. These are vanity projects by people who have money to burn. I don't know, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. These are people who, okay, they see our human limitations. As far as I know, as far as we can tell, human beings are mortal. So that means we will die someday. So what they'd like to do, I think, is to sort of to be able to upload their consciousness, their brains to an AI system, and that way it's like a substitute for immortality. So it's a transhumanist dream. I think their money and efforts could be made better use of by doing research in human-computer interaction and human-centered AI. So I'm going to end my presentation there, and I'd be very glad to receive your comments and suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Alejo, for this very enlightening discussion. I'm sure a lot of people here are they have their own questions in light of what you've said. So we could now open the floor now for question and answer. To the audience, we were told by Dr. Alejo that he only has until 8 p.m. tonight because he's quite a busy person. So let's make use the most of our time in the question and answer portion. Okay. Okay, so anyone would like to ask a question for Dr. Alejo?
Hello,
Ayan. Your po.
Dr. Susan. Yeah, thank you very much for that very interesting talk. I actually read your paper, and the paper also talks about level 4 bots, where there's there's intentionality, there's free will, and all that. What are your thoughts regarding the possibility or impossibility of such bots?
Well, I don't think they're possible, frankly, because I mean, for all our efforts, we're unable to create living beings. What we do is to mix and match, yeah. But to create new forms of life, as far as I know, we've been unable. Okay, much less endow that form of life with higher order capacities. Um, it's beyond what we are able to do. I'd even say um, there are metaphysical interlocks, so to speak, that would prevent us from creating such systems. We don't need to create such systems. As I said, I'm a big fan of Ben Schneiderman, and he says that there are two AI goals, right? One is human emulation, and the other is making useful applications. Yeah. So, for instance, if we're in an airport and we need information to I don't know, get to the departure gate and something like that, does it really matter? Do we really need to be talking to a humanoid robot? Or will it be enough to have, a functional touch screen, and there are certain options, we know where we're headed. Okay, so oftentimes trying to replicate human beings is more of an obstacle, really, than a way forward. Yeah, I mean, machines are supposed to do things in the most efficient and effective and economic manner, not the way we humans do. Because for doing the things the way we humans do, that's what we are there for, right? So I don't think it really makes sense. There's nothing to gain by making level 4 bots.
Yeah. Of course, you understand that it's really there's really no sense in making such a robot, but we can, it's possible for a person with with bad intention to create such bots in order to just probably spite us or to just wreak havoc in the world.
Okay.
So we could stop that person in the same way that if somebody wants to construct a nuclear bomb, of course it's going to be hard for him to do that. But then there are rules regarding that, right? But now how? I mean, it's not so much whether we ought to, but rather than whether it's really possible for us to do that. If there is a fundamental limit as to where we can go or how far we can go in robotics, then that would be an interesting for from the viewpoint of philosophy, there are things like intentionality, the qualia, and all that somehow points to the idea that it's maybe not possible to have such robots. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, firstly, what you're posing is an ethical problem, and ethical problems require ethical solutions. I mean, technology always cuts both ways. It could be all, I mean, they're ambivalent, used properly or improperly. So, I mean, that's the first point. Now, secondly, I think it's a mistake to think. So I presented, right, a neo-Aristotelian perspective. One thing is life form, the different life forms, plants, animals, and humans. So intellectual life, it requires a scaffolding. It requires a scaffolding. First of all, you have to be alive. You have to be able to nourish yourself and grow, right? I mean, a human zygote cannot perform intellectual acts, yeah, because it's underdeveloped. It's underdeveloped. People need to eat. People need to smell. I mean, and sometimes this is what we're trying to replicate. If you put human emulation as the goal, right? There was something which I read quite recently. We're misusing metaphors. We're misusing metaphors. For instance, it's even saying that neural networks. Okay, neural networks. Well, the metaphor is based on a certain understanding of the mind, of the brain, as if it were a network. But what if it isn't a network? Yeah. So sometimes the metaphors, they cloud our vision rather than allowing us to proceed forward. Although we need metaphors, of course. I mean, we need imagination.
Yeah, definitely. Regarding neural networks, we use that a lot, no? But the neuroscientists would actually cringe when
Exactly. You say neural
talk about
networks.
the algorithms and say that the brain functions like these neural networks. They don't agree with us. The neuroscientists are far more advanced. But from the engineering perspective,
Yeah.
the so-called, or what we use as what we call as neural networks, are certainly very useful.
Of course.
Can do a lot for us. And in fact, in recent years, neural networks have actually propelled artificial intelligence to new heights. But again, as you said, in AI, it's really very hard to, it's artificial. Artificial intelligence is artificial. So it's really, we cannot equate artificial intelligence at all with human intelligence, because when we say intelligence, human intelligence, that includes a lot of attributes that are not present in artificial intelligence. So I think we should welcome other questions as well. I'm sure there are many interesting questions as well from the audience.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I saw, by the way, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our president, Professor Mario Santo Domingo, in the audience watching today. Welcome. Okay, so Dr. Raymond Tan raised his hand. Okay. Yes, please feel free to.
Hello, Professor Sison. First of all, good morning and thanks for your talk. I'll read through your paper over the weekend, but I was wondering, would you agree that do you think that there's a need for something like a notion of apparent moral agency? I gather from what you've said that you don't believe that it actually is happening, but from a more utilitarian perspective, that having apparent moral agency as a way for the engineers to design systems that work better for humans, just like autonomous vehicles and such. Could you comment on this, please? I was thinking along the lines of an ethical equivalent of a Turing test.
How could you repeat your last sentence?
Just the classical Turing test as
the Turing test, yes.
So an ethical equivalent might be conceivable.
Yeah, Okay, so let me see. Regarding the Turing test, Russell and Norvig, right? In that textbook, they say, I mean, this 2x2 graph, they say, we should forget about looking, so on the x-axis, it's acting, knowing and acting. Then on the y-axis, it's like a human or rationally, right? So they say what we should aim for is a system that acts rationally. It need not act as a human, right? Nor think as a human. Yeah, so you should forget about that. Just as long as it works, that should be our goal. Okay, so there's certain usefulness. Yeah, some friends of mine here in where I live, we have a huge Volkswagen plant. Okay, huge Volkswagen plant, and some of my friends and faculty they went on a plant visit just a couple of days ago, and one of the plants was filled with robots. I mean, hardly any human being, all robots. But what was happening is that it needed human beings to monitor the robots. And apparently, in those plants, they had very, very high absenteeism. People weren't motivated because their job was the most boring job ever. You're there simply on the standby in case something goes awry. In case one of the robots all of a sudden, I don't know what could happen to a robot, and people weren't motivated to be standing there doing nothing, literally, just minding the robots. But you have to do this. You have to do this. Why? Because robots are unpredictable. Yeah. So I don't know. And there's also this issue about a friend of mine I think he even wrote a paper about robot mistreatment. I mean, robot healthcare aids, mistreatment. It's not the problem of the robot, it's the problem of the human being. Yeah. And what's amazing is whenever you think of reliability, safety, etc., we're never taking the robot's perspective. We're always thinking of the human beings as reference. What's safe, what's reliable, and what's trustworthy for the human. It's not the robots themselves. Yeah, so I don't know if this answers your question, but at least it's what comes to mind while listening to your comments. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that conversation. We're conscious of the time. It's 10 minutes before 8 p.m. Do you still have time?
Yes, we do. There's some questions popping up on the chat. Yeah. I don't know. Should I?
Yes.
answer?
So there's this one question by David Daza.
Yes.
With the example of driving cars valuing its passengers over pedestrians, I feel that we are making uncooperative, selfish AI the standard approach. How could we address that?
Okay, again, misattribution. AI is never uncooperative nor selfish. They don't have any sense of self because there's never an interiority, so to speak. In order to perform voluntary acts, you have to have desire. In order to have desire, you have to have an objective. AI doesn't care. It could never care. Yeah, so I mean, I understand, of course, where you're coming from and what you're saying, but we're somehow all of us prisoners of language. In order to understand ourselves, we need to be making use of metaphors. Okay, so here again, I think Ben Schneiderman he's excellent because he says, okay, we're not teammates. These are our tools. Okay, so let's not anthropomorphize and transform AI into human beings. Now, regarding this thing of automatic vehicles, right? Autonomous vehicles. Well, firstly, Elon Musk, unsubstantiated claims. Like almost a decade ago, he was saying, "Okay, we're going to reach like full level 6 autonomy here, absolutely self-driving cars." Yeah, and it hasn't happened. All his engineers, I mean, they scramble, say, "What on earth is he saying?" Right? Because sometimes you have these this charismatic lunatic leader say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and everyone else, they have to do the job, right, in order to reach those goals. It hasn't happened, nor will it happen. Nor will it happen. Yeah, well, probably it could happen if we were to change, the infrastructure of our cities. I mean, the physical space. Would we envelop, this whole technique of envelopment? Would we envelop all of those vehicles and create their own lanes, et cetera, et cetera? Because the problem aren't the vehicles. The problem comes from human beings, human beings who are unpredictable, right? So I live here in Spain. I've been living here for quite some time now, and right after China, probably we have the widest networks of these high-speed trains, right? But in order to provide high-speed train service, you have to create the infrastructure, dedicated rails. Yeah, so there's this whole technique of envelopment of some technology, which could be very dangerous. So perhaps that's the only way to actually put all those AVs on the road. But that comes at a cost, of course. Now here comes the economic perspective, the costs and benefits. Would we like to do that? Or would we prefer something else?
Okay, thanks. Actually, since you talked about tools, AI being used as a tool, of course, with the election just recently held, there is a lot of talk about social media mediated info dissemination, okay, protocols influencing the outcome of the elections. And some people are actually blaming Facebook, for example, being used for that purpose by some people to influence the outcome. So my question is, what are your thoughts about this, and how should legislation be crafted in consideration of this issues that actually happened and will be happening?
Okay, social media. Remember, we were talking about the dilemmas in the use of AI systems, because they're always competing or contradictory values. So social media, on the one hand, we'd like freedom of expression.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom of expression, to be able to say whatever it is you want, with the proviso that it does not harm anyone else. Now, how we understand harm, physical harm, moral harm, psychological harm, mental harm. Yeah, but in liberal societies, we acknowledge that as a limit. Okay, freedom of expression with a limit of harm with regard to other individuals, right? And then on the other hand, there's this thing of responsibility. So on the one side of the balance, freedom of expression, and on the other side of the balance, if you're responsible, then you should have the ability to filter or to censor the contents, right? So this is what's happening in the US right now. Are these social media platforms, are they common carriers? In which case, they really don't care. They're not responsible any less than PLDT or whoever the phone service provider is responsible if, say, a terrorist uses their lines in order to give detonate order for a bomb in some very crowded place. I mean, we wouldn't sue PLDT for that, right? Or any phone carrier for that, because they're a common carrier. They're ambivalent with regard to whoever is using them. Or if we take them to be responsible for the content, then necessarily, I mean, they would require an ability to censor.
Right.
And that would limit our free speech. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways, right? So I think, again, we have to have recourse to the virtues. What is worth saying, when, where, and to whom?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, understand. Okay. But of course, they're saying that it's not just a simple tool, no, the social media, it also has its own algorithms that, when used maliciously, for example, the way they push information to people's walls, actually their feeds, algorithms could be used for a purpose, could be a malicious purpose to send advertisements, proclaiming a different image for for somebody, a personality, and this could be harmful to the integrity of truth, as what other people would say. Okay.
Yeah, because they're primed for engagement. They're primed for engagement. The thing is, as I say, how much do you pay for Facebook? It's free.
It's free.
Okay,
Yes.
so you're the product. And how does Facebook make revenues? Through advertisements.
Advertisements, yes.
So if you'd like to have, you know, instead of Facebook sort of touting all sorts of stuff, we'll go to Parler. You know, there are other, I think there are other platforms. Or if you want, you go to the premium version. If you go to the premium version, then you don't get advertisements. Yeah. Yeah, it's that simple, not really simple, but that's how it works.
Yeah, this could be could be a long discussion now, but because there's a time constraint where it's 2 minutes before 8 p.m. So I'm being prompted by Angie here that I should be conscious of the time. So
I like engineers because you know the hard stops.
Yeah, right. Okay. So there are 19 participants now. I can see. So can we all open our cameras, please, so that we could have a Facebook photo up? Not Facebook, I mean a photo up with our esteemed speaker, Professor Season. Okay. Okay, kindly open your cameras. Okay, and then
3,
okay.
2, 1.
Okay.
Another one. 3, 2, 1.
So screenshot is what is the equivalent of
Attendance.
creative ways, human computer interaction, human-centered AI.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much again. And thank you to the attendees. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Gisela Concepcion, former president of PASA as well. So thank you for the support. Okay, and to all of the attendees for today, we hope that you were able to get a lot of ideas and inspirations from the talk of Dr. Aleo Season. We hope that we could be able to, if there are questions for you after this session, we can still forward them to you through the email that you sent us. So for those who still have questions, please send us an email and we'll be glad to forward it to Dr. Season.
Okay, next time around in Manila.
Okay, yeah.
Hopefully.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening and good afternoon. Goodbye.